Every mobile device has a display, but what type of displays are there and what do we need to know about them? Find out more next.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Welcome to IT Pro TV's A Plus show. We are diving into, well, mobile device displays, which is actually different from, of course, well, mobile display devices, which I actually found out in 6 times before we actually shot this episode.
That's right, true story.
So we are actually going to talk about that. Wes, help us out. What are we going to look at?
Sure. You know, one of the things when you look at display devices is they all look the same, right? Minus maybe some of the common things that you see, a touch screen versus a non-touch screen. We're going to talk about some of the various technologies that you have for your mobile device displays so that if you need to support them and if you're going for a certification endeavor, you're going to be successful in those endeavors.
All right, so it sounds like the best place for us to tackle this is going to be over at the bench. Let's head on over there.
That sounds fun, Ronnie. Everybody join us over here because we've got a few different display devices that we want to show you, right? Right off the top here is the fact that they don't really look much different, especially when they're turned off. They certainly don't look much different, but if I kind of turn one on, I'll turn the tablet on as well too. You'll see that we have touch screens, we have touch displays, right? Touch displays obviously will interact with, they could interact with a stylus, they could interact with your finger, and it can sense where your finger is on the screen. Now, I said stylus, but the other thing that you have potentially too are these little devices right here. Now, I know that looks like a stylus, but it's actually a touch pen. And that's because the tip of this actually has a light sensor and there's a little bit of logic in it and it matches the device that it's associated with, and it's another way that you can interact with these devices. So, if we can't really tell the difference between these screens, what are some of the things that we should be able to be aware of on the exam? Well, one of the things I want you to know is what is known as a liquid crystal display. When we talk about liquid crystal displays, right, these liquid crystal displays are one of those types of displays that have come from the earlier CRT cathode ray tube days, right, where they were big and bulky, and these were really space savers when it comes to the display types. Now, those are traditional monitors, but we started to incorporate these into the mobile devices as well, too. Now, you might ask yourself, well, Wes, you're mentioning LCD, right? Liquid crystal display. What do you have to say about LED? Well, LCD and LED are essentially the same technologies. LED is a subset of the technology, and really when we say LED, what we're distinguishing the difference between are the backlighting sources. When we talk about an LCD screen, it uses what's known as a cold cathode fluorescent lamp, and that illuminates the entire screen. And then we use things like polarized filters to actually filter out the light. So, when we look at these type of screens, they use a lot of power. They're very bright because the whole entire screen is illuminated, and then we block out the light that we don't want in order, or filter if you will, in order to produce the image. LED screens, the backlight is different because it is an LED, if you will, that is providing the backlight source for that screen. So those are really the differences. They both use the same technologies, but the backlighting sources are slightly different.
Yeah, so when it comes down to that, right, the idea here that we also want to think about are in the LCD, like passive matrix and active matrix?
Yeah, and what's interesting is these technologies, active and passive matrix, again, because an LCD and an LED screen are really the same technologies, they will work in both. You'll see LCDs that are passive, you'll see LEDs that are passive, and the same thing with active matrix. So what is the difference, right? Well, the big difference here is that a passive matrix screen, you have a single column that has a wire through it that is charged and it illuminates. And then the ambient light for the columns that are next to this charged light source, that's how they illuminate, right? So with the passive matrix, what you would have is a slow changes in the images, and it would produce things like blurry images. Well, they decided that as the technology progressed, they needed a way to have faster changes and better images. So what they did is they implemented something known as thin film transistor, TFT screens. These are also known as active matrix screens. And what that means is they have this thin film transistor that provides a light source for every pixel within the display. It is not uncommon for you to see things like PM OLED. We'll get into OLED coming up, but I want you to know that that is for both LCD and LED screens. Keep in mind that the active matrix are the ones that provide the better image today, and we can illuminate each individual pixel.
Now, I also understand that besides the idea of these LCDs, we can also do, in these mobile devices here, the IPS. What is that?
Okay, so all of these technologies are, Ronnie, are panel display technologies, right? Or display panel technologies, if you will. The in-plane switching is an LED technology that really what it does is it's very good because it's very fast. It does wider viewing angles. If you think about a passive matrix screen, one of the things that a passive matrix screen would do is as you move to one side of the screen, you're going to see that the image darkens out. Well, with IPS screens, they give you a wider viewing angle, right? So that's a good thing. The other thing they have too is a higher color range and a higher contrast ratio. Now, let me just take a real quick second. What is contrast ratio? You'll find a lot of technical jargon and definitions about it, but ladies and gentlemen, it's the difference, the measurement, right? It's a measurement of the difference between the brightest bright and the darkest dark. Typically, we say the brightest white, the darkest black. And that the higher the contrast ratio, the better the image. So the IPS, if you will, they have a higher color and contrast ratio than the other ones that we're going to talk about soon coming up.
All right. Now, with that idea as well, with the IPS, there's got to be different other technologies that we continue to advance. So what is the one that I tend to see on backs of things that actually say like TN?
That's right. Okay, so another acronym. We know that when it comes to IT, Ronnie, we're not shy of acronyms, right? So we have IPS, we also have TN. Those are the twisted pneumatic screens. And the twisted pneumatic screens, they advance the technology. Again, it's an LED panel technology that advances that technology in a way that it gives some of the fastest response times, right? If you think about it, right, for somebody that needs high color accuracy, that maybe you're supporting an application that needs really, really good color, well, the IPS screen's good for that, right? But if you need fast response times, right, maybe you're providing some gaming system, right? Or even in your mobile devices. Again, keep in mind, this is across the board with monitor and display technologies, the mobile devices as well. The twisted pneumatic has one of the fastest response times, and it does reduce that motion blur, which is really good when you're talking about high frames per second, and we commonly see that in things like gaming rigs, right? Well, imagine that technology brought to a very small form factor and implemented in our mobile devices. So that is, it also is one of the lower costs, and we always have to think about cost, right, Ronnie? So it's got a lower cost, it's one of the lower cost panel technologies that we have. Now, here's the bad. There's always pros and cons for everything, right? The bad is that it doesn't have a really good viewing angle, right? We've reduced that viewing angle a little bit. And for some people, that might be a problem. Other people might have dual monitors. They don't really care about it. But we do have to keep in mind that it also has a reduced color accuracy and a reduced contrast ratio. So for high color outputs and a necessity of high contrast, this one probably isn't going to be the one that you want to choose or maybe advise to somebody to make a choice of.
Now, is there maybe like a middle ground where we actually say, hey, we can remove kind of the bad of the IPS and the bad of the actual TN?
Yes.
Is there something like that?
There is. There's another one called the VA, and that's the vertical alignment. The vertical alignment, if you will, has the highest it's higher contrast than even the TN screens, if you will. It has a wider viewing angle, so like Ronnie said, it's kind of balancing, some of the goods versus the bads of the other technologies, right? It has a great color accuracy, if you will, and some of these high-end vertical alignment screens are going to rival even their IPS-based screens, if you will, that do have a high color accuracy. So you have three panel technologies that I want you to be able to identify and explain back some of the pros and cons and where we might see them when it comes to LCD/LED panel technologies.
All right, now earlier in our show, you had mentioned OLED. How is that different from what we're talking about?
Well, we just add an O to it, right? No, that's something known as the organic light emitting diode. And this is a fascinating technology, and it's actually been around for a very long time, but not necessarily in a display sense, right? That stands for organic light emitting diode. And technically, it uses all the same technologies as LED/LCD, but it is the electroluminescence compound that is used to produce the image, right? So they found out that you could take certain organic substances and you could hit them with electrical current and it would give you a electroluminescence, right? It would be electrically lit, essentially is what that means. And that's really what the OLED is doing, right? And again, I want to bring you back to the fact that you might see AMOLED, PMOLED. It's not uncommon. That's an active matrix and a passive matrix OLED screens. Now, one of the greatest things about these is like the LED screen requiring less power because we only illuminate the pixels that we need, the power is greatly reduced and the form factor is insanely small. And so much so that OLED screens, Ronnie, and I absolutely love this, they're foldable. Right? So thin that you can actually fold them. And that's one of the great things. The form factor, right? The dimension, size, thickness, if you will, is one of the smallest that we have. And then relative to color accuracy and the quality of the output, it's really a win-win for some of your smaller form factor mobile devices.
Yeah, so when it comes down to that, is there anything else we should consider in terms of like things like the inverters or anything else like that?
Yeah, most definitely, right? So we've talked about, the technologies. I want to say just, when you have to, endeavor into replacing these screens, there are a couple of technologies that I want you to be aware of, right? Ronnie kind of mentioned one, right? I mentioned that you have, like, for instance, you have a touch pen. Well, a touch pen is essentially a digitizer. It's got a little bit of a logic in it, and it has to be matched with the device. This one here actually matches a Galaxy Note 10, right? So it's not going to work on my TCL Android smartphone here. Why? Because the digitizer is not matched to this device, right? A stylus is just a plastic pen, if you will, that doesn't write. But we have to be careful of that. So when you're replacing the touch pens, you need to, or the digitizer, if you will, you need to make sure that it matches the device that you have. The other thing to keep in mind is that because there's some logic in here, we have hardware that needs to communicate with software. Those of you out there that are studying for certification or maybe just supporting this technology, anytime we have software that needs to talk to hardware, we have drivers that are going to be required to be downloaded so that those devices can talk. One of the other things I want you to keep in mind is what is known, Ronnie mentioned, the inverters, right? So that's one of the reasons we have our laptop screen out here, because this is essentially a mobile device. And one of the things we can see right here is that this is actually the power source that plugs into the motherboard, and it kind of snakes in and it disappears behind the monitor. Well, what I want to show you is what's behind that monitor without removing the panel itself, and that's what's known. Let me open this box up. That is one of these. It doesn't look like much, ladies and gentlemen. Let's take a closer look here. When we take a closer look, what this is known as a backlight inverter, right? Little power connectors on each side. These displays require a level of power that the internal laptop does not provide. So we need to have the backlight inverter that accepts the electrical current coming in from the laptop, amplifies it, and provides the power that these monitors need in order to be powered. If that backlight inverter goes, it would look, in fact, if we look at the laptop screen, it would look just like this and it could be powered on, right? One of the ways you could tell that the backlight inverter has failed is that you got a very dim screen, a dimly lit screen. If at all, one of the things you can do is you can actually put a blanket over it or even a piece of paper, and you can shine a light to the side, and when you do and it illuminates the screen, you know you have one of these that has failed and you need to replace it. So that's the backlight inverter. The final thing I want you to remember too is, again, because laptops technically are considered mobile devices, I want you to look at where this laptop, these wires that are going around the outside of the laptop, right? These little wires actually connect to the wireless adapter that's connected inside of the frame to the motherboard, and these connect directly to that wireless network adapter, and they are routed around the LED panel. If I need to replace this LED panel, I need to take it off of the laptop. I need to make sure that I disconnect those wireless adapter antennas, and then I also am aware that when I remove this panel, I could damage that antenna. So when it comes to replacement, these are a few things that I want you to keep in mind, be able to identify so that you'll be successful, whether it's a certification endeavor or if it's going to be something that you're going to be supporting right now.
All right, now Wes, you talked about this idea of removing it. Getting it back together can be just as much of a challenge because of how thin those layers of glass or whatever it is going to be. So we want to make sure that we always remember that, especially when we're replacing that. So even that laptop screen you have right there, it's easy to try and yank on it, and then all you hear is a crack.
Ronnie, I have to say, I have done that before in the past where I have used, a little, what they call a jimmy, if you will, and you rake it down the side of the panel to separate it, and I've heard literally like eggshells, crack, 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 crack. And when you plug it in, you can now see that you got a broken panel. So if you're separating it, it's already broken, that's not a problem. Right. But if you're doing something like maybe separating it to replace the backlight inverter and you crack the screen, well, now you got two things you have to replace. So that's a great piece of advice, Ronnie. Ladies and gentlemen, be able to identify and explain some of these technologies that you've seen in our mobile display devices, mobile device displays, we'll get it right eventually, so that you're going to be successful in your endeavors.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.